Greetings and salutations. Thank you for lending an ear to The Voice of the Times this Wednesday, November 11, 2020. For today's editorial, Remembering a Distant Past to Manage a Troubling Present. Today, November 11 is traditionally remembered in most Western countries as the date that marked the end of World War I. At about 5:45 a.m. in the morning of November 11, 1918, French, British, and American generals met with their German counterparts in a railroad coach in Compiègne, France, and signed an armistice to take effect that day at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, to stop the fighting in what was up until that time the most destructive war ever fought on Earth. The first Armistice Day was celebrated a year later, on a state visit of the President of France to King George V in Great Britain. 102 years later, the commemoration has changed a bit in some countries, although France and Belgium still celebrate it as Armistice Day, or more properly, l'Armistice de la Première Guerre mondiale. In Britain, it is celebrated as Remembrance Day, with special rites held on the second Sunday of November, November 8th this year. Poland marks the date as National Independence Day, as the end of the Great War marked the restoration of the Polish Republic. It has been a national holiday in Serbia, which suffered the highest casualty rate of any Allied country in the war, since 2012. In the US, the date is celebrated as Veterans Day, the original holiday being changed after World War II to honor American veterans of both World Wars. And in Kenya, which played a role in fighting German colonial forces in East Africa during World War I, the holiday is observed on the second weekend after Armistice Day because the news of the original armistice between Allied and German forces took that long to reach Africa back in 1918. The history is worth remembering for its own sake. About 20 million people, more than half of them civilians, were killed in the conflict between 1914 and 1918. But also for the lessons of what followed in the years immediately after the armistice. For one thing, the armistice didn't actually stop the fighting, even though most soldiers on both sides put down their weapons at the appointed hour. There were still pockets of intense combat along the Western Front, until night fell on November 11, 1918, and frequent skirmishes in the weeks that followed. The original armistice was only valid for a period of 36 days and had to be renewed several times until the war was formally ended by the Treaty of Versailles in June 1919. In the meantime, new wars had broken out in several places, with the worst being in Russia, where counter-revolutionary forces with Allied support attempted to overthrow the new Soviet government. And as everyone in our time now knows, because of our shared similar experience, by the time the armistice was signed, the world was already in the grip of the rapidly spreading and deadly Spanish flu pandemic. That pandemic helped along by populations that stupidly considered effective public health measures such as quarantines and wearing face masks an affront to their personal liberty, would eventually kill an estimated 50 million people before it ran its course sometime in 1920. Then there was the Treaty of Versailles itself, which set the stage for the next, even more destructive war by imposing harsh, punitive conditions on Germany and its allies. Ending the institutionalized cult of personality represented by the German and Austrian monarchies was necessary, as was wiping away their toxic militarism. Prostrating their already battered populations as they tried to rebuild their societies was not. Every victory carries within it the seeds of its own ultimate defeat. This is something that the people of the United States and the billions around the world vicariously sharing the triumph should remember. Bigotry, immorality, and murderously willful stupidity do not need to be accepted or forgiven, certainly. It should not be. But neither can anything constructive be accomplished by being destructive. And that's the editorial for Wednesday, November 11, 2020. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to our digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and listen to The Voice of the Times.